Hey, and welcome to the 10th episode of Lessons in Leadership. I'm really excited to introduce someone that has been a pioneering women empowerment in South Africa and actually beyond. And I'd like to introduce Hema Vallabh. I think the best person to explain exactly what she's involved in is herself. So, Hema, over to you.
Thanks so much, Grant. It's great to be here. And yeah, I guess very much my one-liner, as you quite succinctly put it, engineer turned entrepreneur, now turned investor. It's been quite a journey. I've played in the better gender parity space for the better part of the last 2 decades, essentially building now what is a full ecosystem or a group of companies, if you will, from WomEng, our social enterprise that develops female engineering and tech talent, to WomHub, our incubator accelerator that builds and develops female-led innovation and entrepreneurship. Now we're building a bunch of innovation hubs through WomHub Spaces, and we have our first hub in Johannesburg. Cape Town is coming up soon. And now I'm raising my first fund, 535 Ventures, which is a Pan-African VC fund investing in female-focused tech-enabled businesses across the continent. So very much a journey, lots of blood, sweat, and tears, labor of love, if you will. But hopefully it's also just doing really, really meaningful work to one, level the playing field, but also, I guess, in many ways, set the tone for those who, taking the lessons from those I've learned ahead of me, but setting the tone for those who come after me, as well as we hope to have more work like this done more broadly, not just in South Africa, as you mentioned, across the continent, and in fact, globally too.
With the venture that you're currently involved in and all of the initiatives that you've been involved in and continue to be involved in, every environment is different with different people and expectations and past experiences. What have you noticed has been the style that has helped you gain a lot of momentum and make sure that these initiatives and the people within them buy into the vision and actually execute on it?
Sure. And I think, leadership for me is always such an interesting topic because it's not one of those things. Sure, you could go to, at Oxford Dictionary and look up the definition. It'll give you a very nice, beautiful, succinct one-liner. But in real life, in my experience, at least that's not the case. And I think I'll even go one step further. I personally belong to the school of thought that, some people say leaders are born, and I'm just like, sure, can be the case sometimes, but I I was not, and in many ways, I still don't consider myself a leader. I was the insecure teenager at the back of the classroom. I wasn't the kid who would put up their hand and, ask the big question. If somebody told me growing up, pre-18, this is what I would be doing, I would have laughed it off. And I think when you talk about style, then I think for me, um, they say innovation is driven by need. I think very much the same applies for leadership, right? So for me in particular, I guess leadership is born out of, in my case, a deep frustration and if not even anger about seeing a problem and realizing you can either sit back and complain about it or you can do something about it. That was very much the very first catalyst in, as I've developed this group of companies. That's literally where it started, at the back of an engineering classroom, where I was like, whoa, wait a minute, there's just not enough people who look and sound like me, being, female, person of color, coming from the background I came from. And why is this world not just or fair, if you will? And what can I as an individual do about that? Um, does that mean I'm a leader? I don't know, right? But for me, it was very much rooted at solving a problem that deeply pained me, in a nutshell. And I think subsequently, that it's been now 17, 18 years that I've been playing in this space. I've impulse organizations, trailblazed, if you will, in a few of the thematic areas myself and my co-founder, Nadia, have played in. And I think a lot of that, while yes, evolved and grown significantly and changed, the base foundation is still there, right? At every vertical that I've grown, I was solving for a problem that I faced, thinking around how do I, with my tool set, what I have, my skill set, my toolbox, if you will, how do I best do it? How do I loop in the best people around me to help me to do that? And also with what outcome in mind? So, I think a lot of that informs where I'm coming from, what's realistic and able, and still having big picture, audacious dreams, but what's realistic in the here and now, but with the big goal of where, with what end, to what end are we doing this? And I think, and I know this sounds incredibly cliche, but I do genuinely believe in the why, right? So for me, solving a problem is why I do this. What gets me out of bed on a really gray, cloudy day? It's not an easy journey, as I'm sure many people who you've done this podcast with prior to me have said. Anybody who tells you that leadership is easy, they're probably lying or they're not doing big enough things. Um, but I think so, a lot there. But again, just to recap, for me, that my style is informed by what problem am I solving? Why does this? Why me? Why now? Why yeah? Um, why does it need to be solved? What is the outcome if it doesn't? And also, I guess for me then is an openness. I am not one. I don't consider myself a leader. And even if I was, I'm certainly not a perfect or a model or the template by which I feel like leadership should be measured against. But I'm certainly happy to think and talk through, explore what I do feel has worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, where I've had great successes, where I've had deep failures. And I think that culminates in the whole idea that it's a journey. It's not there's no defining start and end point. It's something that's continuously evolving as I also grow and learn and, hope to do many big things still ahead for me.
I really want to unpack that because you've given so many pieces of gold there, and for me the first element that pops out really is the fact that people, it's not like it's a self-proclaimed title when when someone says I am a leader. Like for me, I'm a big advocate for the fact that only other people can consider you a leader because of how you have influenced their environment in such a way where they follow your vision or they follow what you believe in and so on and so forth. So fully agree with you in the fact that we literally have to make sure or make it very certain that we're not trying to aspire towards this title. We're actually trying to aspire towards, like what you're sharing now, around really solving a problem that impacts a lot of people. And as a consequence of you needing to solve that problem or wanting to solve that problem, you're going to need help. And along the way, if you weren't planning on being in that leadership role, well, if you care about the problem as much as as you say you do, you're more likely than not going to jump in with 2 feet. And if that requires you to then get buy-in from everyone and make sure that everyone is aligned and continually reiterating the vision of like why this is important and why we need to continue and inspiring those around you, well, that's as a consequence then of you being in that leadership role. So I think I've never heard it through that angle before. So I think for everyone watching, it's going to be refreshing to know that, hang on, it's not like I have to pursue leadership. I have to actually find the problems that I really, really care about, whether it be just within an organization or, through an entrepreneurial venture. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So finding that problem, and as a consequence of that, when people get involved in helping you solve it, and as you're trying to get more people involved, that's going to lead you into that natural place where if no one else is taking over that baton, you're going to need to do it because this problem needs to be solved. And if you want it to be solved with that intensity, you're naturally then just going to jump in it. So fully agree with you there.
What I will say though, so you're spot on, and I think like anything in when we start this, the definition is one, not succinct, it's certainly not linear. It's also compounded. So yes, that's very much one, and for me, the big foundation of, I guess, if you want to habit my leadership style of me being a leader. But I also think, and it's like a Venn diagram. There's different overlays, and it's a compound build, if you will. So I think that the why is what grounds me as the foundation. But I also like, so this is not just about the touchy-feely around it. It's around, I think the two other components is my personality, and this is a good and a bad thing, but I am, and I don't actually know where this comes from. I'm a bit of a black sheep in the bigger environment I grew up in, but I'm incredibly competitive. I'm ambitious. I am audacious in terms of, and I think it's the confidence and the purpose comes from my why, and that is the guiding light to then direct and rein in the ambition, the drive, the competitiveness, I guess I'm OCD in a way as well. I'm one of those people who, I really do believe in a high level of excellence. And that's, again, it sounds like a good thing. It's not always, because sometimes you do let perfection hinder progress in many ways. And I am quite, like I said, to some level, so like, really detailed, and I have a clear vision in my mind, which again is a good thing. But sometimes you also need to not be so fixated on something to be able to see what's around you. So I think one is the foundation, the why. Two, my personality certainly, like, and this is a good and a bad thing again, but I think, like most people, I hate failure, right? I don't want to fail. I don't I don't allow myself the liberties and the luxuries of failing to some extent, which again is a good drive, but it can also become very unhealthy if not honed and driven in. So you've got, that again, I think the why and the first part is what again keeps you grounded. The ambition and the drive is what keeps you going. And then the third part is, and I think there's definitely more than three parts, but what I think about now is again a bit of a open-mindedness, a curiosity, a refusal to accept the status quo, um, and always sort of pushing the boundaries to try to do more. And that's again a good thing and a bad. All of this exists in balance. Either extreme is dangerous. But I think, like my co-founder, for example, Nadia, who I think we definitely want to talk about partners at some point, because I think the people around you is what drives me as a leader. But I'll come back to that. But what I wanted to say around this whole thing around, apparently I don't celebrate enough. Every time I reach a milestone, I'm like, okay, what's the next thing? Move the goalpost. Um, and I see that as a strength. I know it's not always received as such. But I think so, when I talk about these compound layers, it's the intersection of all of these. If you only had, the why, the purpose, you tend to do things in a way, and you can easily become a doormat, right? Because people that you sort of do couldn't be this whole thing about servant leadership, while important, it's absolute. The whole thing about drive and ambition, if that was the only thing that drove you, that's where you get that's probably why we are where we are in the world today, with there's just no one reining that in. But then the split around never being satisfied and happy, you can actually, from a physical, mental, emotional perspective, drive yourself to the ground if that's not needed. So I think all of these play a role. A healthy intersection of balance, if you will, is probably for me where the gold lies. I don't claim to have achieved that balance, and I haven't found the gold mine in the nuggets there, but I do believe hopefully some of the raw materials are coming closer to taking shape in something that's, going to be a crown jewel, if you will.
Well, it's really, I mean, it's really like, having one coin and there's two sides of that coins, whether it be strengths and weaknesses. And that's the whole thing, right? Is like what someone can consider a strength can also, be a weakness in a specific setting. So I think what I like in terms of how you describe this and going through the different layers and the intersection between them is the fact that that's actually what influences each of our styles, and the fact that if someone has a personality whereby they're a lot quieter, it doesn't necessarily now mean that they can't fulfill a leadership role, because of the fact that there's the one side of the coin of being quiet, but there's also the other side of the coin, the good and the bad, or the strong and the weakness side of it. So I definitely think that that's something worth exploring further. And so if I'm sitting, say, in an organization of a team of 50 people, or if I'm running my own business, what would you say has been one instrumental element when it comes to you focusing on continually evolving or continually transforming as a professional and as just a human as well, when it comes to getting buy-in from everyone and making sure that ideas don't just stay ideas, they actually turn into a tangible outcome?
So, on one hand, it's around, you spoke about um, leadership styles, and if you have this team of 50, whatever the case is, how do you bring the best in people? And there's so many, again, whether it's literature or academia or even just hearsay and inspirational talks around. There's so many different strategies, if you will. There's some people who are like, fake it till you make it. Go out there gung ho, and eventually people will believe. There are others who are like, just you know, go in with your full vulnerable self, and, people will resonate with that, and everything in between. Again, for me, again, there's no one golden formula. I think if there was my litmus test, if you will, throughout all of this is always a sense of authenticity, right? And I know it's a bigger word and it's easier said than done. But I've had to play against across the spectrum. You talk about two sides of one coin, two sides of the same coin. It's like I don't know if this is an age thing or experience, but I've very much I always say I'm an extroverted introvert. So anybody who meets me, I'm very much out there. Put me in a group of people, I will thrive, I will shine, I can public speak, I can do the whole extrovert thing. But I'm actually an introvert at heart, and where I get my energy from. So I always have to develop create this alter ego, if you will, that enables me to be all of that, be the leader that the world wants you to be, and how society expects leaders to show up. But for me, I can do that, and I will step into that role, but that authenticity is what grounds me. So I'll never to go as far as doing anything that does not resonate with my values or who I am as a person. Um, there are things that scare me. There are things that I'm fearful of. There are things that I am very happy to take risks on, and I can play at either extreme. But I think as I think about the different ways, shapes, or form in which leaders need to show up, I've learned that, that authenticity is for me the golden thread that ties it together. And even in unpacking that, right? Authenticity is not just, okay, this is who I am, take it or leave it. I know that even in my authentic self, I'm not perfect, right? I am we can talk about successes and failures as well if you want, but I think for me that's just it. Um the, and I don't always get it right, but I try to ask myself at the end of every day, um, you know, what could I have done so differently, or what keeps me up at night because I completely stepped out of line, or I did something really great, and how do I do more of that? And I think, for me, that periodic, regular checkpoints to know that, and I go back to where I started. It's not a destination; it's a journey. There is no end point, but checking your oil and your water every part of the journey is what keeps the car going. And I think for me, that as a leader, I'm still figuring it out. I am still building organizations. I'm still building teams. I am still um, figuring myself out in many ways, shapes, or forms. And I think those checkpoints is what's helping guide me along. And I think when you're able to do that, you're able to garner the support and the buy-in, if you will, and others will come along with you. And that's sort of what I guess I'm striving to do in a bigger, better way now.
In terms of where you're at now and the checkpoints that you say that you are fundamental to make sure that you're not kind of like getting high on your own supply, that you really make sure that you've got a social circle around your support circle around you to make sure that you can be held accountable as well as kind of be supported through those tough times. For you, you mentioned your partner earlier, and maybe can you unpack around what your partner and you have really been able to do that? If you were to think back now without your partner, how would have that looked?
Absolutely. And I mean, so for me, there's one one almost universal truth about leadership that I believe is that leadership is lonely, right? And I don't say this out of a space of arrogance or that leaders are better than others and the like, but and I said this may be a bit controversial, but I think sometimes in being a leader, it's a whole thing about taking different type of personalities, and often I felt I don't fit in, right? Because either people don't get me, or whether it's, I'm very blessed with an incredibly supportive family and a social circle and the like. But even the people who have your best intentions don't always get what you're doing or where your vision is, or when you're burning the midnight oil and you're pushing yourself so hard, or if you're making decisions. When I first left corporate to follow my passion, and this was 10 years ago, many people didn't understand. And I've had to make some really hard decisions along the way. And um, it's so hard with people who are well intentioned, who want to be there for you, but just genuinely don't get it because for whatever reason, right? And I think for me, the single biggest reason for my success, if you want to call it, if I don't claim to be very successful or, reach the pinnacle of success, but the single biggest reason of where I am today is because of my partner, Nadia. You talk about two sides of the same coin. We always say we're two halves of perhaps one big superhuman. We're both superhero fans for sure. Um, and honestly, if I think around the groundedness, the trust, the the being able to soundboard someone who can hold you accountable, someone who, you can take off all the masks in front, will still see you and bring out the best in you. And I think we're able to do that for each other. We're very different in personalities, but we have a very similar shared vision. And it's such a unique combination of, a yin and yang, if you will. But in the same way, we are whole people by ourselves, but everything we do is so intertwined. And this is, yes, we've been partners in building the businesses, but when you live a life that I was like, if someone asks me to separate, work and life, and I'm just like, it's the same thing for me. Not from a, or perhaps, but not fully from a workaholic perspective, but as an entrepreneur, when I talk about that why in the beginning, everything in my life is so intertwined. So then the people you work with, the people who frame you as a leader, the people who, you step back and forward with in your high times and your low times, that's the partnership we've been able to build. And I always say, and whether it's a partner, whether it's the team around you, it's around, it's not there's no guarantee or anything like, but how to make the journey less lonely, and how does that then bring out the best in you so that you can be the best for others. And I think for me, that I've been very fortunate to find that in my partner.
And how you share this, I think, even practically for for someone that's even in their 20s, and they're not even, say, managing a team, right? And I think the best way to start is even just seeking out like a mentor, but not in a very I always say it, when seeking mentorship, we shouldn't be as blunt as to go to someone, knock on their door, or whether it be a DM or something, and say, will you be my mentor? Be more subtle about it, and first start with something that you're experiencing that you'd like a second opinion on, something that you're experiencing that maybe you'd like a different perspective on, in such a way where if you find a connection, chemistry in a professional manner, then you realize, hang on, can we continue this? Like, can I come to you next month perhaps? And then it turns into something more formal, where you go, okay, like, I've enjoyed the last, say, 3 to 4 times that we met. Like, can we maybe turn this into more of a routine? And I think that's for me what stands out now, what you're sharing as well, around like, if you're not yet in a position where you have a partner, like a professional partner, just start with a mentorship, and then from there, that possibly, I mean, one of my mentors turned into my partners.
For me, that's just it's I find, and I guess maybe I say this through the lens which I see the world, right? But I think humans are so interesting, right? If we approached all our engagements the same way we do romantic relationships, this would fundamentally change, right? So when you talk about, you don't just, or maybe some people do, but you don't just DM somebody and say, go out with me, right? You get to know you, whatever the case, whatever your process is. But the way we approach romantic relationships, be it with, a partner or whatever that is in whoever's life, if we could approach all our engagements, so whether it's a mentor, whether it's a business partner, whether it's a friendship, um, if we put the same weight and effort and philosophy and approach, that's when you see the magic happening. So again, I'll go to Nadia and I. So Nadia's married. She has 2 kids. I'm divorced. I have been in relationships before. Um, and we've lived these lives as individuals, but she always says, Hema, you're my soulmate, and vice versa to me. And so, and people sometimes find that strange because we're not romantic partners. We're not. But people have mistaken us for such just because of the way even the terminology about partner. But whether it's a client or a friendship, approach it like you would a relationship, right? We work at it, we communicate, we put in the time. We met through a mutual group of friends. We weren't friends before we started our businesses together. And like a relationship, it evolved. And to your point, that's when we realized that we were such a great fit together. But I think, whether it's your co-founder, your partner, or if it's a mentor, or if it's a friendship, I think as humans, we separate the way we think about relationships. And I think as a leader in particular, when you at the leadership is lonely space, it takes a lot of trust and vulnerability to be able to be your full self. And that will only come if you approach it the way you approach a relationship, and you give it the same respect, time, effort, and allowances that you would the way you would perhaps a marriage or otherwise.
touching on the teams area, because I think especially through a South African lens now, and it's something that I truly admired when you started to talk about it at the event that I saw you live, where we as we as a team, diversity can be seen to be a weakness or can be seen to be a strength. I view diversity to be an absolute a strength, when there's true authentic intention behind like why you're doing it for the specific reasons of really getting different backgrounds, perspectives, thinking, to a point where now you've got such different views of how to solve one particular problem, and you really can get the best out of the possible solution, that comes from that. And for you, can you maybe just explore around your experience thus far, and possible one or two learnings around where people seem to be getting diversity right within organizations and where within teams, and where they seem to be falling short or not truly understanding it through what you've seen?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think diversity, like why I started this conversation on leadership, is not a singular definition for it. Yes, there is one in the dictionary, but especially in the world we're living in now, where there's so much dialogue and everyone's talking about it, it's become very sexy. It's become a buzzword. But what does it actually mean, right? So this couple, one of my favorite quotes is, and I think I said this when we met as well, where diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance, right? So diversity is, yes, you can, get the right numbers, you can get the right check boxes in, but how inclusive are you really? And I know I sound like a stuck record, but also goes down to why, right? So why is diversity important? Why is diversity such a big thing at the moment? It's not, yes, it is absolutely the right thing to do in terms of morals and justice and that, but actually, it just, why wouldn't you want to have different views and different perspectives and different um inputs in? Otherwise, we're also only building in this tunnel, narrow visioned space. I think the way we've approached it is, in my world, of course, we talk about gender as the foremost trigger, but there's gender, there's race, there's discipline, there's backgrounds, there's diversity is such a multifaceted um term, if you will, in terms of what it should involve. And I guess maybe I'm super naive or maybe idealistic about this, but it blows my mind when people don't think that diversity is important or can't understand why people are making such a big fuss of it, right? Um, we're living in a dynamic world where things are ever evolving, and one way for business to remain competitive and, it's this whole design versus the user experience. The only way you can meet the user experience is that the people who are designing look and sound like the people they are then designing for. And I think this has been the incredible mismatch in the way we've historically, the world was built. I play first as an engineer, then as an entrepreneur, and now in the investor space. Um, the world is not built for women of color from Africa, right? And I've had to fight my way into every room I believe I deserve to be in. I have to spend the first 15 minutes of every conversation first establishing credibility before I can have the conversation that my, white male counterparts start off with. Um, this is not about complaining. It is about the reality. So that's why it's a buzzword. That's why it's more pronounced. And that's why there's so much attention on it now, because we need to first level that playing field. But my idealistic view is this should be normal. It shouldn't be special that I'm a female founder or a female funder or, whatever the case is. And the same translates to race and, all the other levels of diversity that we speak about, nationality, different backgrounds. And it just means that we have to do more work to get there. And I think organizations that are doing it as the checkbox exercise will be those who fail, and those who will maybe see, short-term results and be long-term falling apart. Whereas those who know why they're doing it in a deliberate way, and let's talk about economics as well. Those who put capital and funding and a budget towards actually doing it properly will be the ones, the organizations that grow and thrive and succeed in the future in like I said, this ever dynamic, ever changing world that we are building for the future.
Have you experienced when people are getting it right, or at least moving in the right direction, like practically? I think you said it was around all of us have unconscious biases, and so kind of being conscious about the fact that you have an unconscious bias, and therefore what are you going to put as parameters to make sure that when that happens, that you kind of get back into the fact that, hey, are you being inclusive, are you being equal within regards to access or choice, and so on and so forth?
It's the first time I'm thinking about it through this way, but it's again, there's multiple ways to do this. So yes, there's, when we grow up as kids, we go to school to get an academic education, right? We all get that in terms of a base footing. So in the same way, the starting point is, to open ourselves up and learn about why this is important. There's a lot of training and that out there. And I say this with the deepest because that also can go very wrong when done in a very flappy way. But there is a component of there's a learning, there's an academic, there's a tangible component about learning about diversity, and I think that's important. But likewise, when you go to school, you do all these subjects. You realize there are some you enjoy more than others. You could be good at math and science, but not good at history and biology. So I think in this learning process in organizations, very practically, what resonates with you? Why are you doing this? Don't try to be everything to everyone. Maybe if you want to approach that from a team's level, through an organizational, through a cultural perspective, understand what resonates with you, what's relevant for your environment at the time, and go with that. Start small, right? You don't have to do an overhaul and overheat right in the beginning, because sometimes, I'm not saying that works sometimes, but I think more often than not, start small and fix what you need. And then likewise, when you graduate from school, you go to university and then you choose this career. What do? You gather information, you understand what the industry, what the environment looks like. And I think this last part, when we think about diversity for organizations or as individuals and everything in between, is you mentioned around it as well. There's an unconscious bias, right? You don't know what you don't know. And how do you then be open and curious enough and be receptive to feedback? How do you put yourself in uncomfortable positions? And I think if organizations can do that more, they'll understand where the cracks are and why things are broken. Um, it's obviously so much easier said than done, but I think there's different approaches. And it starts like anything in life. It starts with the individual, right? You need one or two or three or four, depending on what the context is, catalysts. You need people who deeply believe it, who have the know-how, the knowledge, and who have the access and the network. So it's when all of these things overlay to get the right buy-in. That's how organizations can, very tangibly transform and actually start. I'm not going to say solving this, because it's not going to be solved, unfortunately, in my lifetime or yours, but at least we can start getting to a more level playing field. And I think the role that we as individuals, leaders aren't just the ones who are at the top. In your microcosms, who are the leaders? Who are the ones that trigger and, kickstart these movements? Um, that will then become something that's more generally accepted as, the norm in hopefully, fewer years to come in more.
In South Africa, there was one particular pharmacy chain, that the memo that the leadership team or the management team, the executive team, they sent to everyone saying, stop hiring white people and stop, promoting white people. We need to get our BE score. And you mentioned earlier around checklisting, right? Using that as an example, do you think if a management team, and this now goes across South Africa and abroad, is if the senior leadership team within a company is all white, and let's just say kind of the pencil of privilege, which is all white, male, straight, like kind of if we just go with all of that, and if that's the case, should they be getting involved, directly within, say, creating a more inclusive environment? Should they be the ones trying to engineer this, or should they be getting help? Should they go, hang on, maybe I'm kind of not necessarily, I don't know what I don't know, so I'm actually needing to look for a professional, and then more likely first go to the team? Like, what do you think practically should a business like that then be doing, and especially if the team is in a very, call it, highly privileged environment, into meeting all of those
Sure.
characteristics?
So first of all, I think it's an and in both, not an either or, right? I believe in top-down and bottom-up approaches. I think everybody needs to be involved. And you talk about, so if your leadership is just that, everything you mentioned, white, male, straight, the privilege is there, right? It's not about also simply saying, okay, I'm going to step back and just, because I don't, I'm going to make space for somebody else. there's this idea of allyship, right? So how do you use your privilege? How do you use that platform to then create, handhold, mentor, if you will? But how do you and I think this big thing, and we're going into a much more detailed conversation. I don't want to not do this conversation justice by trying to do a snapshot, but this whole thing around privilege is also this idea of you, Grant, to not have to necessarily give up something for me, Hema, to succeed. How do we go there together? And I think too many people fear that if I'm a white male and I have to, create the space for this black female coming up, I'm going to be left on the streets. Not that extreme. And hence I say it's the and both and either or. Thing around, let's not hire white males anymore. That may solve it for the short term in terms of getting balance, but you're creating a bigger problem for the future. And that's just reverse racism, right? So I think that's equally non-diverse and equally non-inclusive. So this whole thing, I think, we talked about balance earlier from a different way, but I go back to my chemistry roots where everything needs to exist in equilibrium, right? At a steady state. If anything's on either extreme, the tipping of the scales is always dangerous. So I think even when we approach diversity, even if we approach this here, absolutely. I mean, a large part of the work I do is, wishing that I had the access that, my white male counterparts do have, but it doesn't have to be at the cost of those. But I think this whole thing around blaming and apologizing and give it to me because, I just, not because I deserve it, but because you owe it to me, that's dangerous in so many different ways, shapes, or forms. And this whole thing about unlearning and relearning and understanding, again, why we're doing it, right? So if we're working, the world is, depending on who you speak to, moving from being more polarized or unified, but no one can exist in a world that is going to, not be diverse. So if nothing else, how do we then create environments that are representative to the world we want to play in? And again, I'm very much an idealist in this perspective. But I do think, one, like I said, allyship is important. Some of my biggest champions have been men, and I'm grateful for that because they have access that I don't. And those who have used their privilege to help me along the way. And I, on the other side, will do the hard work and, make sure that I'm equipped for that and not just riding somebody else's coattails along the spectrum as well. But I think right now there's too much of resistance. There's too much of fear around it's going to be at my cost. And there's just too much of almost the short-term mentality as opposed to the long-term glory that can happen if and when we can get this right.
Outstanding. And I think a lot of people, especially nowadays with the access that everyone has to information, I think people are a lot more exposed to it. Therefore, the conversation is coming up more and more and more, which I fundamentally believe is a good thing. And I think, like you said, it's not around creating enemies; it's around creating allies. So, Hema, we've run out of time, but I want to thank you so much for your perspective. It's been super insightful, super practical as well. So, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.